Good morning and happy Saturday. Happy Black History Month. My name is Sydney, and today I'll be doing a little presentation on Black history and herbalism. Before I get started, I just wanted to share a little bit about my journey with herbs. Um, I was first introduced to healing with plants back in college. I had really bad anxiety, and I was put on anxiety medications that unfortunately had some very negative side effects for me. And I decided not to take them anymore and to look into other alternatives to help, deal with my anxiety. And that was kind of my first introduction into healing with plants. And then shortly after I graduated from college, I moved out to Denver. And the being in Denver was definitely a culture shock for a Southern person like myself, being born and raised down here all my life and moving somewhere that's it's just different. The culture is much more open, and I guess the word progressive is what I would use. And so, yeah, there were a lot more people who were interested in these kinds of things. And I would go to bookstores and buy like these old books on different herbs. I have like books that are like this thick, full of just different plants and herbs and their medicinal uses. And so that kind of, kept me on that path. And then I don't know if any of you watched the video that I did 2 weeks ago on Black history and agriculture, but I mentioned how, one of the things that got me into farming was my love for herbalism. And yeah, like I said in that talk, there were no schools down here. Like after I moved back to Tennessee, there are no schools for me to attend. And so I just kind of, throughout the years, just kept reading, researching, practicing like medicine making, like for myself and for my family. And up until recently, I finally took a course, a year-long course that I just finished in January. I'll probably be looking to do another one sometime in the future. But yeah, I love herbs. I love healing with plants, and I'm always learning more, always buying new herbs to try out. I use it on myself. I use herbs on my son, and he has gotten to a point where like when he's sick, he knows he can ask for these things. If he has a stomach ache, he automatically asks for peppermint tea, or if he's feeling like he's got about to catch a cold, he'll ask for elderberry syrup. So just getting these things as part of our normal routine can empower us to know like what things can help to heal our bodies in a more natural way. I am not anti-pharmaceutical drugs because they do have a time and a place. They can be life-saving for sure. But I do think as a society, we do overprescribe things, and we do, I think that the plants definitely have their place and should be just more normalized using herbs, like personally, like if I have a fever or a headache, I don't have Tylenol in my house. I don't have Motrin. I have plants that I use for that. And same with just, common illnesses, stomach aches, skin conditions, rashes. Just, I think if we can, use herbs start to use them for like these everyday occurrences, then, it can just kind of empower us to take our health into our own hands. So that's my little spiel. I will go ahead and get started on the presentation. All right. Okay. So what is herbalism? This is just kind of my definition, but basically working with the plants of Mama Earth in a way that promotes holistic health, wellness, and vitality. And plants can be used preventatively. So, you can take your elderberry syrup preventatively. You can, for people who menstruate, you can take your red raspberry leaf. You can take that, before your cycle, during your cycle. And it can also be used, plants can also be used curatively. So if you're actively experiencing illness, you can use plants in that way. And I use the term holistic, and that means, working with the whole body. So a lot of times with herbalism, and it's something that if this is something that you feel called to, I encourage you to get out of the mindset of, oh, what herb is good for colds? What herb is good for this? I want you to try to look at it as from a whole body perspective. So not just, what herb is good for that. Because herbs have, they're much more than being good for something. And like if you Google herbs for a cough, you'll get so many different results. What kind of cough is it? Is it a wet cough? Is it a dry cough? Is it, do you have a lot of mucus? Is it hurting your chest? There's so many different things that we need to look at when, selecting what herbs we use. And yeah, mind, body, and spirit. I believe that herbs have spiritual properties to them as well. One that comes to mind is dandelion. If you think about a dandelion, they grow everywhere. You cannot get rid of dandelion. If you try to pull it up by the root is so deep into the ground. And so I think of dandelion as being very grounding, keeping you very rooted in who you are, rooted in your truth, rooted in your foundation, and resilient. It grows out of the concrete. And it has this bright, shiny yellow flower, like you can't miss it. And then as it matures, it turns into the little puffball to make wishes, and we scatter our wishes. So yeah, I think that plants do promote mind, body, spirit healing. Herbs have been used all around the world. In India, they have the Ayurvedic system, which is thought to be one of the oldest medical systems, the oldest healing systems in the world, developed over 5,000 years ago. In Egypt, the Ebers papyrus was found, and it dates back to 1550 BC, and it contains 700, I think more than 700 different herbal preparations, and as well as remedies and magical formulas for all kinds of things, from parasites to how to use herbs for contraception. In Hawaii, they practice la'au lapa'au, which is their traditional healing system, and it's practiced by Native Hawaiians, and it's often passed down orally through the generations. And that's going to be true with a lot of different, a lot of these herbal traditions are often passed orally. And in Japan, we might be familiar with traditional Chinese medicine, and in Japan, that was introduced in the 7th century, and they kind of adapted it to a Japanese culture and lifestyle and came up with their own more refined system of herbalism known as Kampo. This is a picture of the Eber's papyrus. I thought it looked really cool. I have no idea what it says. I think people who study hieroglyphs, that's probably a really cool job. But yeah, it looks cool. So I thought I'd share. And this is just a graph that shows the use of herbs. This is Arabic holistic medicine. And so it just shows like, you know, there are 700 species that they use medicinally or as pesticides. Over here, it just tells, hold on, just. My mom's puppy wanted to complain. Yeah, so 150 different herbs used in Jordan, 55 herbs used as cosmetics. So this is just a chart that I thought was really cool, just showing different herbs used throughout Arabic countries. Herbalism is also heavily linked to spirituality. People and plants have evolved alongside each other over time. And so people have developed these relationships and connection with herbs and use them as part of their spiritual practice. You can see this in shamanism, Yoruba, voodoo, Native American spiritual practices, paganism, and all sorts of religions and spiritual practices around the world incorporate herbs into their practices. Now, during enslavement, you know, I spoke a couple of times about how Africans were chosen for their agricultural knowledge. European colonizers didn't know how to grow in the heat of the Caribbean and in the warm climate of the American South. And so they chose Africans specifically for their knowledge. And I also mentioned about the braiding of the seeds in their hair. I'm sure some of those seeds were probably medicinal as well. And so white slave owners were dependent on the knowledge of enslaved Africans as well as Native Americans. Enslaved Africans often collaborated with the Native Americans in that cultural exchange of the medicinal properties of the local herbs. And they often took on the role of healers on the plantation. You know, during these times, a doctor wasn't just around the corner. And so they had limited access, especially the enslaved Africans had very limited access to a doctor. And so they played the roles of their own healers within their community. Some plantations, of course, forbade the practice of herbal medicine. And, you know, one thing is that the owners, the slave owners, were often like they depended upon that herbal knowledge when they got sick and their medicines didn't work, but they also feared that knowledge because it's what kept they didn't want the slaves to be empowered. The enslaved Africans would often forage in the surrounding areas, the woodlands, the wetlands, for their plant material. Herbal knowledge was used as a tool of liberation as well as resilience, and I think that that's still true today. We can still use herbal knowledge for our collective liberation. And yeah, like I said, the slave owners, they often went to the enslaved whenever their own medicines didn't work, but at the same time they were fearful, and so that's why some of them forbade this knowledge, is because they feared this African root medicine. And I think it's kind of funny. And with that, definitely comes erasure. You know, it's no shock that, you know, the contributions that Africans and African Americans have made to history have been erased. We've seen it plenty of times in recent history as we learn more and as more things are uncovered. We can see the erasure of Africans, African Americans, and Native Americans as well. So this one is talking about a Black herbalist named Caesar. It says he was an accomplished Black herbalist who developed a cure for enslavers who believed they were poisoned, using plantain and horehound as active ingredients. And so the South Carolina legislature awarded him his freedom and an annual stipend in exchange for his recipe and his commitment to continue to make this medicine. And they published his recipe. If you can see here on the side, it's impossible to read, but it says the Negro Caesar's cure for poison. In this Gazette, and you know, this is what he was known for, but then several years later in another book, it has no mention of him and his contributions. So it says of plantain, it's a prominent folk cancer remedy in Latin America, used widely in folk medicine throughout the world. But yeah, it doesn't mention him or any Black herbalists at all, even though he had this huge contribution and did this big thing. So Harriet Tubman, Harriet Tubman was such a huge figure, not just for the Underground Railroad, but she served in the Army as a nurse. She was a farmer. She was the queen. And she was also an herbalist. She had a lot of herbal knowledge. And at the age of 5 years old, she served as a nursemaid for a white family. And then went on to be a nurse in the Civil War, where she treated soldiers for dysentery and smallpox. And her herbal knowledge also helped to keep those that she was helping, it helped to keep them safe on their journey of the Underground Railroad. She used opium poppy tincture to help kind of keep the babies quiet so they wouldn't cry out. It would put them to sleep. And she knew which plants were safe to eat. When they're going on this long journey, they don't have a Kroger right there. So it was up to her to have that knowledge of which plants were safe for them to eat for sustenance. Reverend John Snowden. He was born in Westminster, Maryland, born into slavery, but he eventually bought his freedom. He says that after working all day for my owner, I would work till late at night for myself. I made baskets and hickory brooms, distilled peppermint drops, pennyroyal drops, wormseed oil, sweet mint, wild bergamot drops, sweet fennel, and rose oil. These I sold during the holidays. And so he would sell his drops and also do other work to eventually save up and purchase his freedom. He learned his plant knowledge not only through books, but not through books, but he learned it not just through the other enslaved people, but also just studying the plants and being in relationship with the plants. He would pay attention and he would learn what they were. He would memorize them, and that's kind of how he deepened his knowledge, was just by being in that relationship. And he said, the slave mothers and fathers had quite a good deal of medical knowledge, much more than the present generation has. No doubt this came from the fact that many of the slaves had to be their own doctors in most cases. Necessity compelled them to study the use of herbs and roots in order to effect cures. And he treated himself, he treated his children, and members of the Black community, as well as white folks too. I think he did, so this quote, both of these quotes that I mentioned from him came from his autobiography. And I think he said, like, in all his life, he had never been to a doctor. He had treated himself for any illness that he had. Next is Emma Dupre. She was born in Falkland, North Carolina, to formerly enslaved parents Penia and Noah. She is the 7th of 18 children. I think she went on to have a few kids herself. I think 5, maybe. I can't really remember. But she had several different nicknames. Most notably was That Little Medicine Thing, Woods Gal, Granny Woman, and Aunt Emma. And as a kid, she spent her time wandering around in the woods and along the Tar River banks to familiarize herself with the native plants. And in this picture, she is gathering up, it looks like goldenrod, I think. She then moved to Fountain, North Carolina, and that's where she really deepened her knowledge and became a traditional healer in her community. She grew sassafras, rabbit tobacco, mint, sage, silkweed, and more. And she developed a strong one-on-one relationship with the people that she treated. So she wouldn't label her jars of, like, take 3 times a day, blah, blah, blah. She wouldn't do that. And so whenever you came to her, you had to sit, you had to listen, and you had to remember what she said. And so that's kind of what helped her to develop these relationships with people. And she didn't set prices for her services. People would come in if they could pay her, they did. If not, sometimes people would give her different ingredients that she needed to make her medicines. So she would trade in that way. But she, was a true community herbalist. She received the Brown Hudson Award from the North Carolina Folklore Society. And she also received the North Carolina Heritage Award. And this is a quote from her: "Take this medicine with faith. I am just the instrument." So she acknowledges that, all she is a person that's putting these plants together. The work is really coming from the plants themselves. And so she encourages people, to take it with faith and not to, like, she's just the vessel, she's just the instrument that's putting it all together. And this is Margaret Charles Smith. She was a midwife. I wanted to include her because midwives were definitely healers in their community. And while they might not be herbalists per se, they did often use herbs. I would say more often than not, midwives would use herbs with their patients. For Black people in general, like, midwives played a huge role in the birthing of their babies. When hospitals, of course, either didn't treat Black women or just had racist laws. So midwives played a huge role in the communities. She was born in Eutaw, Alabama, where she was raised by her grandparents. Her mother died, I believe, 3 weeks after giving birth to her. And so it's just interesting that she went on to be a midwife herself. She became one of the first midwives in Greene County, Alabama. She birthed over 3,500 babies. The number that I've read was anywhere from 3,000 to 3,500. So somewhere in there, she birthed a lot of babies. And she never lost a mother and only lost very few babies, which really speaks volumes to her expertise, because during this time, the mothers were often malnourished. They weren't in the best health. And so the fact that, and the infant mortality rates were high at this time. So the fact that she never lost a mother and lost only a handful of babies is really incredible. She caught her first baby at 5 years old. That's the term that, medical people use, like whenever a woman is pushing the baby out and they catch the baby. So she caught her first baby at 5 years old. I believe she was attending the birth of her future husband. So the man that she goes on to marry, it was his cousin's wife, and she was there at the birth, and they went off to get the midwife, but before the midwife could come back, the woman had already given birth, and so she caught the baby. She only completed school through the 3rd grade, but continued to learn in other ways. She would do apprenticeships, informal apprenticeships with other local midwives. She received her official midwife permit in 1949. And again, going back to her level of expertise, she was able to deliver babies that were considered high risk. So babies that were in the breech position, twins, preemies. And a lot of times, like even today, midwives, and just depending on the laws of your state, midwives are not allowed to deliver these kinds of babies. Like some midwives are not allowed to deliver twins. Like if you're having twins, you have to go to a hospital. So yeah, it just speaks volumes about her abilities. Excuse me. And these are just some of her accomplishments. So midwifery was outlawed, but because she had so much expertise and so much experience, she was able to continue practicing. She co-authored a book, which is basically I think it's her autobiography and just kind of detailing her career as a midwife, called Listen to Me Good, The Life Story of an Alabama Midwife. She was a keynote speaker at the New Orleans Rural Health Initiative, Lifetime Achievement Award winner at the Black Midwife and Healers Conference. And in 2010, she was inducted into the Women's Hall of Fame. Something that I want to mention about her, as well as Harriet Tubman, Harriet Tubman she's often described as illiterate, but I want to kind of challenge that. She may not have been able to read and write, but she had a depth of knowledge. And same with Margaret Charles Smith. She only got her education up till the 3rd grade, but her experience in other forms, in other areas, speak volume. And so, yeah, I just always think it's interesting when people call Harriet Tubman illiterate. I'm like, is she really though? Because she's done a lot of things that I probably could never do. And she has, a wealth of knowledge. So yeah, she might not be literate in the typical sense of the word, but she's intelligent in many other ways. And same with Margaret Charles Smith. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay. And I just want to point out just a few herbs and remedies. Of course, I can't go over all of them because there are so many herbs used for so many different things. We would be here all day trying to go through it all. It would be impossible. So Spanish moss. I love the way Spanish moss looks. I think it's so pretty. But yeah, the Spanish moss, when it's boiled, when it's green, you can drink the tea for childbirth. It increases the flow of mother's milk, and it assists with the delivery of the placenta, the afterbirth, and then taken twice daily to clean out after giving birth. So to kind of cleanse everything after giving birth. So yeah, it seems that Spanish moss has a pretty good use around childbirth. Asafoetida, it was sometimes worn around the neck in a bag or taken internally to treat colic. And inhaling it or ingesting it helps with asthma, flu, high blood pressure. Horehound was typically made as a syrup and treated asthma, bronchitis, and eczema. And it also promotes concentration and mental clarity. Mullein is a highly effective cough remedy. It's expectorant, antibiotic, demulcent, and anti-inflammatory. You can use it as a tea or you can smoke it. And the flour, you can make an oil out of the flour and use that as an effective remedy for ear infections. Sassafras. Sassafras smells really delicious. If you've ever smelled the bark of the sassafras, it was used as a diuretic, a blood purifier, pain relief, inflammation, gout, and stomach aches. Plantain, which that you can find that around here everywhere. It's used for skin irritation, like so if you get a bug bite or a bee sting, poison ivy, things like that. I was out on the farm with my 4-year-old and he was near a wasp nest. He didn't see it. It was like underneath the table, so he couldn't see it. And he got stung by like 6 wasps. They all came out and just swarmed him and stung him a bunch of times. And of course, he cried. It's painful. He cried for a little bit. But then right after that, he went over into a patch of grass, found some plantain, chewed it up, and put it on his bites like I showed him to. And yeah, it helped to take out some of the redness. It helped to, soothe that irritation in the bite. And so, yeah, I love telling that story because, it just shows that one, these things work, but also just teaching our kids at a young age, they remember these things. I think I showed him like once or twice. I got a mosquito bite and I showed him like, hey, you can take this, chew it up. It can be kind of gross. It's called a spit poultice, but whatever. But yeah, chew it up and then put it on your bite and it'll offer you some relief. It is also used as a gentle laxative. The seeds are used as a gentle laxative. And it can treat sore throats, fevers, and yeast infections. Boneset can be used in the treatment of fevers, colds, arthritis, and it produces perspiration, so it makes you sweat. If you need to, like there are some times where you might need to induce sweating in order to help heal. And black walnut. The bark, hull, and leaves are traditionally used. It's also used as a mosquito repellent, an anti-parasitic, digestive support. It's antifungal, so it can be used for, I think it's been used for athlete's foot. And unlike boneset, it reduces excess sweating. And, these are just a few plants that have been traditionally used. There are so many more, like I said. And, I don't know, maybe your parents or grandparents, did some of these folk type remedies. I've seen one and I made it for my son, like an onion syrup. You slice some onions and you put in a jar, put a layer of onions and then a layer of sugar, another layer of onions, layer of sugar, and you keep doing it like that. And it makes like a little syrup that you can use to treat for coughs. I haven't done this one, but I've heard of people's parents or grandparents putting slices of onion or slices of potato in their socks when they're asleep, I think for like fever or something, or, you know, sitting over hot water and inhaling steam with peppermint, or maybe I'm trying to think what else you can put in steam. Maybe like pepper or onion, something to open up your pores. You know, maybe you've done things like this, like these folk remedies. And I'm trying to think what else. What other ones have I heard of? Just when in my research, like I was reading one about back in the day, if you wanted your husband to stop drinking, like if he was a drunk and drinking too much alcohol, you would skin an eel and then put that in his liquor, and he would never drink again. Or if someone had the chicken pox and you go in the chicken coop and let the chickens fly around you, or just push somebody into a hen house if they had chicken pox. So I mean, some of these things might be old wives' tales. I don't know, but I love that because, you know, it's just part of the magic, and I think that we can use a little bit more magic today. So yeah, I think those kinds of things are fun to read about. Here's a list of resources if you are interested in reading up a little bit more. Unfortunately, there are not a whole lot of books written by Black herbalists. I have plenty on my shelves that are written by white herbalists, but there are very few Black herbalists who are writing about these things. But I think over the years, I've definitely seen an increase in Black people, you know, getting back in touch with our roots, including using herbs as medicine, using plants as medicine. You know, I've been that person for my family whenever they're sick. What my dad will say, whip me up one of your concoctions. And I'm like, all right, Dad. So maybe you're that person for your family or that person for your friends. But I think as time goes on, we will definitely see, you know, more and more Black people jumping on this train, on the herb train. And I love it. You know, as I mentioned in one of the previous slides, it was used for resilience and liberation. And I think that we can still be using herbs for our collective liberation and resilience. That is about all that I have. Yeah, I just want to encourage you, you know, if this is something that you're interested in, get outside and learn the plants that are growing around you. There's so many, and I would love to tell you about them if you're interested. Yeah, I would definitely start by building that connection with the plants. Like, of course, you can just go to the store and buy your herbs and make your medicine. That's fine, but try to get in touch with nature. Try to, you know, get in touch, build a relationship with the plants that are growing outside around you, even if they don't offer a medicinal benefit. Just being out in nature and being surrounded by plants they have so much healing to offer us, whether we ingest them or not. So yeah, if there's any questions, my email is ckeel@knowledgequest.org. I'm also at the farm if you want to drop by and say hello. But yeah, I definitely would like to encourage you, you know, if there's, you know, if there's one thing that's common, let's say you get a cold every year, you always get the cold. Try to find a remedy for that. Talk to me. I can help you. You know, I'd love to help you come up with something that's good for you and your family. And that's at least one thing that you have in your medicine cabinet that's made from the earth. So if you could, you know, just make one thing. I think that's a great start if you have no clue on where to start. But yeah, that's all I have for you. Happy Black History Month again, and I hope you all enjoy your